Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Curious Mind podcast. Today, I want to introduce you to the psychological work of Stephen Wolinsky, especially to his book, Trances People Live. And I explore with you how our mind creates states of trance that influence our behavior, emotions, and identities. This is a big one, so stick around. Volinsky wrote in the 90s psychological books, and then he focused more on spiritual teachings, which are his bigger calling. He spent a lot of time in India, and he was a psychologist before that. When he started writing and expounding on his teachings, then he first focused more on psychological content and then went on to integrate psychology and spirituality much more, which is still doing today. Nonetheless, his psychological works are quite original, and I do recommend to go back to them to find fresh inspiration. So in 1991, the book came out, Trances People Live, Healing Approaches in Quantum Psychology. This is what he called his approach, quantum psychology. In 1993, Quantum Consciousness, A Guide to Experiencing Quantum Psychology, and also in 1993, The Dark Side of the Inner Child. As I said, my focus today is on trances people live. So what exactly does he mean by trance states? When we think of trances, we often imagine someone getting hypnotized, for example, in shows or in stages, and getting into an exotic state of consciousness. But Volinsky understands trance in a much deeper way. He argues that our experience, our behaviors, and our identities are held together but by what he calls deep trance phenomena. And these are states of mind on autopilot. We get triggered, and then we get thrown into ready-made experiences, moods, feelings, thoughts, and actions. They do feel fresh and real, but actually they are just copies of what we often experienced in the past. And this is what, for him, the trance is. Now, later on, he goes on, because it's a psychological and basically therapeutic book, he goes on about therapeutic examples, but he really extends it to everyday life situations. And to give you an example of that, for example, we might see a cute puppy on our way when we visit friends, and then we fall into a cute puppy trance. This is nothing clinical. There's nothing wrong with that. It's an everyday experience. And yet we fall into a certain pattern that is on autopilot. We start to speak in cutesy language. Our heart feels opening up. We touch the puppies, we pet them, and we're playful with them, and we get into a positive mood. So this is an example of a positive trance that we experience on an everyday level. Generally, they are, for Volinsky, three general characteristics of trance. One is a narrowing, a shrinking, or a fixating of attention. And this is very important. When we are in a trance, we feel narrowed down in our consciousness. Something pops up in our mind and takes prominence, it takes over. And we are filtering out the other information. And this happens much more dramatically in deeper trances and deeper states of hypnosis, for example, in clinical hypnosis. But this is also true in so many everyday life situations. So the first general aspect is a narrowing or shrinking of attention. The second aspect is that people in a trance usually experience that things are happening to them. Not that they are the free agents, but they are kind of sucked into emotion where things are happening to them, which is there is an experienced, limited, or reduced sense of freedom. It's a sense of being on autopilot. As I mentioned, while Volinsky develops the general view that our normal life is full of trance phenomena, he then focuses on mental health issues and symptoms. He sees these symptoms as patterns, which have mostly started as survival mechanisms in childhood, but later manifest as problems in adulthood as well. So when we experience overwhelming emotions or trauma as children, we create, according to Volinsky, trance-like states to cope. And these early defense or coping mechanisms become so ingrained that by the time we're adults, they function automatically on autopilot. They throw us into the experience. It's like our mind is running a script in the background, and without us even knowing it or consciously managing or steering it. Before I get into some examples that Volinsky discusses, I want to describe how I differ from his perspective. Volinsky, in his book, is still rooted in the view of the human potential movement, largely coming up in the 60s and 70s of the 20th century. And this human potential movement states that trance states in childhood or symptoms or traumas in childhood are the result of difficult or traumatic experiences, extraordinary experiences, negative experiences, which then translate into a repetition in later years and adulthood. This view is still at the root of today's trauma discourse. You probably are aware that the understanding of trauma has become much more generalized. I have some content on my channel about this. It has been diluted, and the idea of trauma has become so omnipresent that people trace back even small problems they have in the present to traumatic experiences in the past. So this is an understanding that started to form in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And in my view, Volinsky is a little bit too narrow in understanding trance as connected with traumatic experiences. To me, this view is based on a fallacy, which is the fallacy to overemphasize extreme events because they stick out so much and to neglect normal events. To me, it's clear that it must be the case that babies and children are constantly in states of mind that have to exaggerate views, interpretations, and emotions. Why? This must be so because of the fundamental problem that minds have to predict a future that isn't there. There is barely a few getting a little bit deeper. I will discuss this more in the next episode, but to get a little bit deeper into phenomenology, what we experience in the moment is a prediction. It's a calculation based on experiences and calculations that we have done in the past. For example, we don't have, when I look into my room and I look at the chair and the door in front of me, I don't have to think about, I don't perceive this as a calculation. My immediate experience is that I see a chair, I see a door, I see my girlfriend, I see my parent. When they start to open their mouth, I experience as if I exactly know what they are currently thinking or which mood they are in and so on. Not because I recognize and I come to this conclusion because of a complex calculation. This is only true in very ambiguous situations where I have to think and consider what is actually going on. For example, when I wake up at night and I have to find my way through the living room in very dim or darkness, then I'm consciously processing. Then I'm much slower in the movement because I have to understand what I'm seeing in front of me. I have very limited information and I have to consciously interpret. This is usually not the case in everyday life. Things are immediately present to us and we are confronted with a seeming reality. This is nonetheless the result of a calculation. We as adults have made innumerable calculations of this in the past. And so we are confronted with a very solid reality. Babies and children don't have this archive of experiences. For them, calculations are still fresh. And for complex reasons of how the mind develops, at least in my mind, it's clear to me that they have to exaggerate what they see, exaggerate in the sense that they don't have much to fall back to. they have to interpret something that they see on its face value, thereby to exaggerate. And this is how, this is the climate in which the mind develops. A climate in which the interpretations and emotions are mostly, in most of the situations, really off, really inaccurate, at least in contrast to our adult, more experienced position. So the young minds with little experience can base their projection of the future only on very little information they have. And so they will exaggerate the meaning of situations, which leads to exaggerated emotions. And all this exaggeration to not to be right and so on, this is what we then, we see the results of these, we see kind of the traces of these also in adulthoods. We see when people are adults, we see the inertia of those ideas coming from childhood and young age. And this again will, the exaggerated interpretation, the exaggerated emotion, this will lead to triggers and inadequate reactions in the future. And what my point is, regardless if there were traumas or not, right? As a child, we have nothing else to fall back to than our interpretations of the moment. Our interpretations cannot be true. They cannot be good approximations of what the reality is because we lack experiences as children. And so if we stick to these interpretations up until adulthood, then we display phenomena that are close to trance phenomena of daily life, but they're not based on traumatic experiences. They're just based on, so to speak, the building material of the minds that was accessible to us as children, which were inaccurate. Okay, to give you an example of what I mean, it's very common when you observe children in the house environments. Now, adults have, the parents have complex interactions, right? Sometimes they argue, and adults have, the parents have quite a refined understanding of what the argument means. Do they just raise their voice? Do they get heated? Maybe they're passionate. They are discussing about budget, about where to go on vacation, and so on. Now, children, and in a much stronger way, for example, pets, if you have arguing parents, then you have a little child in the family, and then you have the pet dog in the family. Children, and much more the dogs, they of course don't understand the words. They interpret the energy that is there. And so the puppy, that gets excited and gets anxious because there's tension in the air. In a similar way, even though not as simple, the child gets anxious and gets worried that something is on. And it's not unusual for children after the argument of the parents to ask them if they split up. And then, parents often, they laugh it off, like, how do you come to this understanding? Well, because you were fighting so seriously. You had this argument. And then parents have to describe, no, this is not a serious argument. Sometimes mommy and daddy are loud. When this occurs, this interpretation occurs, children, because they lack the experience, they are very self-centered in the sense that they relate things that are happening to them. And often enough in situations where an argument, for example, between parents have occurred, and let's say it was a serious argument, and many couples break up and they separate and so on, children have the tendency to think that they are somehow responsible for that. Why? Because they are encapsulated in their minds and they have not yet made all the experiences that let them approximate and interpret the situation in a more accurate way. They have what they have, and what they have is themselves. Everything relates to them. It's a quasi-paranoid kind of state of mind that children often have. And so they will be worried and feel bad because they think that the parents start to separate because of them. And this is an example of the exaggerated state of mind that even without traumas is very ready to create trance-like states that can translate into adulthood. Okay, but back to Volinsky and some of the negative trance phenomena that he's talking about. One is age regression. This is very common. We use this in therapeutic work quite a bit when we analyze situations in which our clients kind of get worried, get very stressed. They often age regress. When we regress in age, our thinking becomes less differentiated. We have absolute convictions about what the other is up to. We think like a child. We might even throw a tantrum. The aggression that we display can be childlike. So these are all experiences of age regression. Regression is just a Latin word for going back in time to a childlike way of experiencing. And this is often triggered by events. And then in therapies, we work on identifying those triggers and differentiating the experience to bring people back into a more adult mode. So age regression, very common trance phenomenon that is connected with symptoms and mental health issues. A second one is more trance specific. And this is the pseudo orientation in time. This is what it's called. This is when we imagine catastrophic outcomes in the future or relive painful memories from the past, meaning we are not in the present. In our minds, we're going to the future as if we're witnessing what will happen to the future and have the according emotions, or we're going back to the past. So in this sense, pseudo orientation in time might be a specific aspect of age regression. And then we relive the memories from the past. And again, we have the emotions from the past, which are so real that they affect our environment, they affect the people around us, they affect the way that we are able to work and to function in normal life. And this is how we get really restricted and affected by this trance phenomenon. The next one is post-hypnotic suggestions. So when you look up YouTube videos or see documentaries about hypnosis and specifically stage hypnosis, those hypnotists, they kind of make quirky fun of it. So they put people into an hypnotic state of mind, and then they tell them, okay, in a few seconds, I will count back and will bring you back into everyday awareness. But when someone in the audience sneezes, you will feel a headache, for example. So this is a post-hypnotic suggestion. The hypnotist implants an idea about the future and tells people how to react when something in the future happens. This is, of course, a stage act, but it's based on this trance phenomenon. A little bit more generally, post-hypnotic suggestions are, in the context of symptoms and mental health issues, are negative beliefs we carry with us that we recreate in the future as if we programmed them ourselves to produce negative outcomes. An example, the belief nothing will ever work out, or the belief I'm not good enough. If I'm implanting this idea in someone, so let's just assume, for the sake of simplicity, I'll put someone in a trance and I tell them, okay, when I snap my finger, you will come out of it, but you will walk around, you will have your everyday life with a firm belief that you're not good enough. Then this person will create situations, will manifest situations, will bring about situations through their actions, through their interpretations, as if they're not good enough. And especially in interaction with other people, they surely will come out with a conclusion, with the experiences that they were not good enough. They interpret what they did in a negative light. They will feel very uncomfortable, for example, with themselves, to which then the other person reacts. Imagine a work situation where you feel very insecure. You've done a PowerPoint presentation, you present it with a low voice. You will have kind of questioning gestures, you will make breaks, you will stutter and stumble and so on. This will create in the audience the impression that you don't know what you're talking about, and they will reflect it to you by not making eye contact, by turning off, looking at the phone, and so on. So it will have created a situation where the presenter who got this post-hypnotic suggestion implanted will come out with a conclusion, obviously I was not good enough. I knew it. I'm not good enough now. I will never be good enough. Post-hypnotic suggestion that leads into serious mental health issues. The next one is negative hallucinations. Negative, not in the sense of bad, often in clinical and psychiatric contexts. Negative means that something is too little. So a negative hallucination is when we block out something, when there is a loud clock in the room that is ticking and we stop to hear it. That is, in this sense, a negative hallucination. In clinical contexts and psychological contexts, this is not really relevant. It's an everyday phenomenon. What is psychologically relevant is when we block out our positive resources. We as adults have made so many experiences. Most people, it's difficult to imagine that any person did not successfully cope with negative, difficult situations. And yet, there are many people who reduce themselves in their own mind to the insufficiency. So they're blocking out the positive experiences that they made, and thus they're displaying the symptoms of negative hallucinations. They focus only on what is wrong. Volinsky, he names and details many more of these examples of trance phenomena. So I encourage you to go back to the book and to read them up. These trances, and this is what I want to emphasize, they're not just mental tricks. They manifest physically and emotionally. They feel very, very real. When you're in a trance, your attention is again narrowed and fixated on those certain thoughts and convictions and emotions. And often it feels like it's happening to you. Your mind is on autopilot. You are not in control. Instead, the trance that is managed by your unconscious, it takes you on a ride. And this ride disconnects you from reality. It disconnects you from really what is going on, what people really want in the social interaction, and it throws you into your inner world of exaggerated interpretation, the inner world of the child that had no other way than to exaggerate the interpretations of what is going on. Okay, let's take a look again at how Volinsky thinks that these trances form. As I mentioned, Volinsky explains that these trances start in childhood, especially when we feel threatened and overwhelmed. I already critiqued that a bit. According to him, as kids, we create trances to survive. But as adults, those solutions that were there in childhood, they become a problem. And here again, I deviate a little bit. In my clinical practice, when I work with people and they would like, for example, a tool, an exercise to deal with a current difficult situation, I'm happy to give them tools, but I make this remark: be careful of the consequences. This tool will help you now. If you stick to it too rigidly, this solution will become a problem in the future. Why does it become a problem? Now, as you're learning this tool, you're very aware. You're trying to figure it out. And then you do figure it out and you see that, oh, the tool works. This is so good. The next time you apply it, you only look for specific markers. Basically, the predictive mind, it wants to see if it can apply the past tool to the next situation. Let's say it works again. 1-2 years in the future, I'm looking only for very small marks. And as soon as it somehow fits my mind, because it wants to be quick, it will slap the past solution on the current situation, but it will be more and more out of place. I have changed, the situation has changed, the circumstances have changed. So my solution of the past will be more and more inadequate. And this inadequacy will result in me not solving the solution, having still a problem. And yet I have developed this inertia, I have developed this habit of doing the same again and again, which is to apply this previously successful tool. And by doing that, I'm causing again frustration, and in worst case, a problem of helplessness and so on. I might slip into symptoms. I might slip again into mental health issues if, and this is what I try to warn my clients again, if I'm taking this tool too rigidly, assuming that it will work forever. Okay, so something like this is what Volinsky mentioned. As kids, we create trances to survive, but as adults, they become part of the problem. They develop into intricate defense mechanisms that operate autonomously on autopilot. And soon enough, we're living in these trances without even realizing it. And if I asked you before listening to my content now, would you have thought that you're living in many kinds of trances throughout your day? You would probably say no. It would feel very real and accurate what you were going through. Now, I hope that I could raise some doubt in your mind that maybe will lead, after you have listened to this content, to you understanding and analyzing a little bit more what actually in your experience is really fresh, an expression of a real contact with the circumstance, with the persons around you, and how much of it is a repetition of past patterns, of you being on autopilot in everyday trances. And in worst cases, this can lead to mental health issues. So think about it when you feel under stress. Probably you will get stuck in a mental loop of negative thinking, repeating situations again and again, blaming yourself again and again for not having said this, for not having done that. You might dissociate from your body, or you might feel a heavy state of no energy, lack of energy. All these are examples of negative trance states in action. This is how they feel real. Okay, so how do we get out of these trances? According to Volinsky, the first step is awareness. We need to recognize that we are the creators of these trances. And with we, he means the bigger organism, the spirit, the mind, and in a maybe more normal psychological way, we can say we is the unconscious plus the conscious, we as mental organisms. So we need to recognize that we are the creators of these trances, and as creators, we have the power to create them and to change them. We can disidentify from the trance states and see it for what it is, which is a mental pattern, not your true self. And here's the good news. You can learn to de-hypnotize yourself. This involves expanding your awareness, grounding yourself in the present moment, and reconnecting with your body and the world around you. To give you a simplified, condensed version of what you will find in much more detail in Volinsky's book, you could start in step 1 to notice any physical sensations tied to the trance. So first of all, you become aware, oh, I'm again reliving a trance state. And then you can go into your body. What does it feel like in the body to be in this trance state? Where's the tension? Is it in the neck? Is it in the chest? Is it in the upper arms? Is it in the jaws? How is my breathing? Usually when I'm in a negative trance state, my breathing is tight. Where do I feel this constriction? To recognize those physiological, those bodily representations of the negative trance state, and to look at them without judgment, just noticing. Again, our main tool is expanding awareness. As a second step, you can ask yourself, how am I relating to my current state? So here, we'll leave the observation where it is in the constrained, narrow state, and we zoom out. And by zooming out, I'm already enhancing my degrees of freedom. And I can do this by asking myself, how do I relate to my current state, to this trance state? Am I okay with being stuck here? Do I agree with the reaction of my autopilot system that my mind wants me to make with my automated behaviors or emotions? Or in other words, and to be a little bit polemic, but it's good to pull myself out with this question, am I okay being a robot? Am I okay being a slave to the trance? Of course, the answer is no. It will help me to zoom out, to get out of the autopilot mode. As a third step, reconnect with the people and the things around you. It's like awakening a little bit from a slumber. It's like, where am I really? What are the objects around me? To look at the people that you're interacting with, the people that have triggered you. What is the reality of the moment? What are they really saying? And not to get lost in my interpretation of what they mean. So reconnect, and this is one of the most important parts, reconnect with the things and the people around you. Remember that trances often pull us away from the world. They pull us away from the people with their real complex motivations, and we make them really simple, right? So a trance thought would be, this person is out there to get me. They just want to dominate me, right? If I'm triggered in my relationship, I will make the mind and the intentions of my partner really, really small, as if they're not a real human being, as if they are simply programmed machines. Oh, they just want to get revenge right now. Nothing else is going on in their mind. And I can assure you, this is not true. So when I find myself in having such a simple and oversimplified interpretation of what is going on in the other's mind, you can be sure that this is the result of a trance. And then I can remind myself, okay, wait a minute, what is going on right here? What might be other possibilities of what the other person is going through? To give you another example that I often use in my therapeutic work, don't imagine that people are driven by one singular focus. Understand that what you see is usually the result of an ambivalence. Imagine or understand that people are in a conflict, and what you see is the result of that conflict. On the one hand, they want to stay in the relationship. On the other hand, they hate to feel dependent on you. So what you see will be a compromise of that conflict, of that ambiguity in the words and the actions and so on. So there's already a differentiation from the oversimplified projections that I make onto what I think is going on in their mind. So this is the third step, which obviously involves many kind of thoughts and techniques. Reconnect with a real person in front of you, with a real complexity of the situation. And in step 4, and this is more general observation, a conclusion, a conviction, recognize that you are the creator of these states. You have choices. You can differentiate your experience, both in your body and with the other person. With the body, how? When I look inside myself in a trance state and I analyze what is going on in the body, often it starts with a very undifferentiated fog, a mood, a darkness, some mist. And then I can ask this physiological, this bodily sensation, I can ask it questions. Okay, are you rather colorful or are you rather monochromatic? Are you static or are you moving? What shape are you in? What other characteristics are there? So I'm asking differentiating questions to make this blob of an experience more differentiated, and thus to actively combat one of the main features of trances, which is this narrowness, this rigidity, the undifferentiatedness of it. I'm directly combating, going against this aspect by asking it differentiating questions. When I get out of the focus of the body and deal with another person, I can ask myself, what might go on in their mind? Again, what are their conflicts? What are their motivations? What do they feel? What do they want? All of this for the purpose of enhancing my differentiated understanding of the situation and in the big picture to understand that I am the creator of the trances. And with more and more examples that I gather, it will help me to snap out of it quicker. I just have to remind myself, oh, there is a real person there. I created the state of mind. I was triggered. I was age regressing. I was trapped in a oversimplified negative interpretation of myself or the other in that situation. Okay. Now, Volinsky goes through many of the different types of trances, as I said. He describes them in detail, and he recommends specific treatments for those problems, often rooted in hypnotherapy. To give you just one example is the treatment for post-hypnotic suggestion, which I described earlier. One of these treatments could be to write down your visions of negative future scenarios. Again, awareness is one of the key elements in our treatment. When you become aware of it, when you write down your visions of the negative future scenarios, this is how you are setting yourself up with those visions into fear and anxiety. For example, of your insufficiency. Let's say I write down what I have in my mind. What is in my mind is the conviction I will never be able to, for example, find a partner, have a career, be satisfied with myself. These might be real thoughts and convictions in my mind, right? And this will create and shape future situations. And I'm reacting now to my image of the future. I think about the future and I feel so terribly exhausted. Why? Because I'm facing a problem that will never go away, my insufficiency. I can also have convictions, not about me, but about life in general. For example, life is a never-ending cycle of frustration. This is a post-hypnotic suggestion because it will color, it will shape and frame every situation that I'm engaging with. There is the possibility of a new job. Oh no, this will be frustrating as well. The possibility of getting into a relationship when I was single. Oh no, this will be frustrating. Or should I end the currently super dissatisfying relationship that I'm in, but then being single will be frustrating as well. So this is how such a conviction can color and frame every image, every vision of the future, and thus hold me back from doing the right thing. And so it will manifest into mental health issues. So I write it down and I become aware of those specific programs of post-hypnotic suggestion. The next step is I turn this outcome, I turn this finding, this conviction into question. Instead of, I will never be able to find a partner, I will put it in the question. Will I never be able to find a partner? Instead of the conviction, life is a never-ending cycle of frustration, I put it as a question. Is life a never-ending cycle of frustration? And so by turning it into a question, I already introduce the possibility that this is not true. I introduce the possibility of more degrees of freedom than this very narrow interpretation that I have. The next step is my variation. So far, this was what Volinsky recommended. My variation or continuation in this process is to differentiate the question by, for example, saying, under which circumstances? So not only to ask the question, will I never be able to have a relationship, but to turn it into, under which circumstances will I never be able to have a relationship? To change the question of, is life a never-ending cycle of frustration? To change it into, under which circumstances is life a never-ending cycle of frustration? And by asking this question, and in the final step, to give an honest and serious answer to this question, I become the scientist of my own conviction. Under which circumstances is life a never-ending cycle of frustration? Simple answer, for example, when I deal with the wrong people. When I deal with people that don't understand me, have not shown in the past that they could understand me, and still do so. Yes, if I'm surrounding myself with these people, then I can create a situation where life is a never-ending cycle of frustration. Or when I'm fascinated by life goals that are totally out of my reach because I'm not qualified, I don't have the energy, I have not prepared myself for it, and so on. So I want to become an astronaut. And I'm sending 100 letters to the European Space Agency or to NASA or whatever. And of course, I will get rejections all the time. Well, under such a circumstance, yes, life is a never ending cycle of frustration. When is it not? When I'm picking, for example, goals that I'm qualified for, or I'm picking a goal that I don't have the qualifications yet, and I'm getting those qualifications, those skills, then life might not be a never ending cycle of frustrations. So, this is how I would approach a differentiation, bringing a conviction into reality by directly engaging it with the circumstances that create a negative outcome and a positive outcome. And again, there are many more examples in the book for the different kinds of trances that Volinsky describes. One of the most powerful ideas in Volinsky's book is the concept of trance identities. Trance identities. These are identities we fuse with. And it goes in the direction that we had already before, like I'm a failure or I'm always anxious. When I build my identity, my self-view on convictions like these, then I have a trance identity. Then this is what defines each and every interaction with other people, for example. When we fully identify with these states, they become our reality and it becomes so tangible, almost irrefutable. When other people tell us, no, you are able to achieve something, and this goes counter our build up habitual identity, we will say, you have no idea what you're talking about. You don't live my life. If only you knew. And so these realities will create situations that seemingly force me to believe again, because repeating the autopilot, that I'm a failure. Trances are very powerful. Don't underestimate them. But here's the thing. These identities have boundaries. And you, as a human being, with your soul, with your spirit, you do not. You can step outside of these identities and recognize that they are convictions, very powerful, enchanting convictions, but nonetheless, they are only, in quotes, convictions. They are not the essence of who you are. So the next time you feel stuck, stressed, or overwhelmed, as a first step, remind yourself that you are in a powerful trance. Get this awareness. Then disconnect from this narrow state of mind. Get an outside perspective. For example, by speaking through a friend, to a friend, or getting into an environment that is not poisoned by your habitual trance. A very simple example is just take a walk in the neighborhood where you have never been in. You will immediately get more attentive. You will immediately connect more with your surrounding, what shops are here, what kind of people are walking around here, and so on. Or talk to a friend, have kinds of conversations that you haven't had for a long time. This will help you to snap out of it, as is the common expression today. Okay. All in all, again, I can really recommend Volinsky's book and his content in general. If you are more spiritually inclined, you will find interest in his later works, the things that are on the website. I will leave a link in the description. I think he's a creative thinker. He's deeply rooted in spiritual psychology and not at all interested in fame or success. A lot of his content is just free on his website. He's also a quirky character when he describes things, but many individual thinkers are. So his style in the end is a matter of taste. Next time, in the next episode, I will investigate in detail how, on a technical level how these trances form in consciousness and why we can get rid of them completely, but how we can at least limit their power over our lives on a more general, fundamental basis. I will connect it with Buddhist psychology as well. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to more content like this. If you like, below you can also find a link to a free 30-minute consultation with me if you're interested to work with me and you want to check it out. And let me know in the comments, have you lately noticed yourself in a trance-like state? How did you snap out of it? I would love to hear your thoughts, and I would love to see you next time. Take care.